Chapter 1, The Old Self. The old self, which is also called the sinful nature, is described by the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 7. This identity and what it is in bondage to stands in direct opposition to the original created identity of humankind, which was made in the image of God. One of the most important attributes to understand about the old self identity is this. It is a self that is born into slavery. Why is it so important to understand that our old self is born into slavery? Because if we miss this truth, we end up warring against ourselves and instead of against the spirit that enslaves us. Paul describes this condition in Romans 7. Romans 7:14, sold as a slave to sin. Verse 17, it is no longer I myself who do it, but sin living in me. Verse 20, now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me who does it. Romans 7:21, although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. Verse 23, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind, and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. Verse 25, I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. Key insights from Romans 7 to help us understand the old self-identity. 1. You did not choose it. You were born into slavery. 2. In the old self, you are not choosing sin. Your master, the sinful nature, is forcing you to sin. 3. You are not the enemy. Your old self, the sinful nature, is the enemy. It is important to note here that there are times when people make a conscious decision to sin, and we will go into greater detail in a later chapter about the concepts of choosing to sin and bondage to sin. These truths are essential to understand because through deception, Satan uses them to keep you in bondage. Here's how he deceives you. 1. He tells you that you choose to be a slave, leaving you ashamed and hopeless. He tells you that you love your sin and are choosing to sin, when in fact, as your master, he is forcing you to sin. He tells you that you yourself are the enemy, so you war against yourself, wound yourself, hate yourself, and destroy yourself. He tells you that other people are your enemy, so you continually war against them, when in truth they are fellow slaves. He does all of this because if he can keep the slaves deceived about these things, they will never seek freedom or join the rebellion against their evil master. We will explore later in more detail how you were born into slavery, what sin really is, and how we can join the rebellion to become free. But for now, it's critical that we understand these foundational truths about spiritual bondage. Paul says this clearly in Ephesians 6:12. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Don't miss this truth. Freedom from the old self begins with knowing the truth, that you and others who are enslaved are not the enemy. This realization allows you to stop destroying yourself and others and free you to begin warring against the true enemy, the evil master who keeps you in slavery. God sent Jesus to release and free those held captive by their old self. This is declared as a promise in Luke 4:18. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free. This includes you. This is the promise of Jesus for your life, that you will be set free from bondage of your old self-identity and discover and put on the new self that God created for you, a self that is free. Key takeaways. The old self-identity was born into slavery. It did not choose slavery. As a slave, it is bound to the will of its master. Because the old self is a slave, its free will and self-agency are very limited. The old self lives under the deception that it is free. Under this deception, the old self wars against itself and others. The old self believes it is making choices when it is not. This deception causes the old self to fight the wrong enemy instead of rebelling against its true master. Jesus came to fulfill the promise that captives will be released, the blind will see, and the oppressed will be set free. Lisa's story, how this impacts life and relationships. Lisa keeps falling into a cycle of anger and harsh words, especially toward her spouse and children. She feels ashamed, convinced that she's just a bad person who will never change. The guilt causes her to withdraw emotionally from her family, which strains her relationships even more. After counseling, she gained an understanding that the old self is a slave to sin and how Satan uses deception to make us believe we are the problem. Lisa had a breakthrough when she realized she isn't the enemy, sin is. Her struggle isn't proof of her failure, but of the war being waged in her spirit. Her anger is a symptom of the old self's influence, not her true identity in Christ. Impact. Lisa begins to shift her focus. Instead of beating herself up after every mistake, she starts praying for strength against her real enemy, sin. She becomes more compassionate toward herself and others, recognizing they too are fighting unseen battles. Her relationships improve because she now fights for connection instead of pushing people away out of guilt and shame. Most importantly, she begins to believe that freedom is possible in Christ. Reflection questions. In what ways have I misunderstood my struggle with sin, as if it were my true identity rather than the result of spiritual bondage? 2. How has believing the lie that I chose this sin or I am the enemy affected my self-image and relationship with God? 3. Have I ever seen others as my enemy rather than recognizing we are all caught in the same spiritual battle? 4. What does it mean to me personally that Jesus came to set the captives free? Where do I still feel like a captive? 5. How would my life look differently if I truly embraced the truth that I am not the enemy, but rather Christ came to rescue me? Discussion questions. 1. Why is it crucial to understand that the old self was born into slavery and didn't choose it? 2. How does this chapter reframe the way we view ourselves and others who are still living under sin's rule? 3. What are some modern or personal examples of the lies Satan uses to keep us in bondage? 4. Discuss Romans 7:20. It is no longer I who do it, but sin living in me who does it. How do we reconcile this with personal responsibility? 5. How can recognizing the truth about spiritual bondage shift our focus from self-condemnation to spiritual warfare? 6. What are some of the practical ways we can begin to rebel against our evil master and walk in freedom?